The morning
You look
sun cast
absolutely
long
radiant
shadows
today.
across the
And you
manicured
always know
gardens
how
of
to make me
Kensington
smile.
Palace as Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, stood at her bedroom window, watching her children play in the courtyard below. George chased Charlotte around the fountain, while little Louis toddled after them, his giggles echoing off the ancient stone walls. For a moment, everything seemed perfect in their world, but Kate knew that beneath the surface, storm clouds were gathering. William had been different lately. She noticed it in the way he held his shoulders, tense and rigid, as if carrying an invisible burden. His usual warm smile had become forced, appearing only when the cameras were rolling or when the children needed reassurance. Late at night, she would find him staring out at the London skyline, lost in thoughts he wouldn't share. The phone call that would change everything came on a Tuesday afternoon. Kate was reviewing her schedule for the upcoming charity gala when she heard William's voice from his study, strained and breaking. She pressed her ear to the heavy oak door, her heart racing as she caught fragments of conversation that made no sense. Words like diagnosis, time, and prepare the family drifted through the wood, each one hitting her like a physical blow. When William emerged 20 minutes later, his face was ashen. The strong, confident future king she had fallen in love with at university looked suddenly fragile, as if a strong wind might break him. He pulled her into his arms without saying a word, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. In that embrace, Kate felt the weight of whatever news he had received, and she knew their lives were about to be turned upside down. "We need to talk," William whispered against her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "But not here. Not where the children might hear." They walked hand in hand through the palace gardens, past the rose bushes that had been planted to commemorate their wedding, past the bench where they often sat to watch the sunset. The familiar paths felt foreign now, as if they were walking through a dream that was slowly turning into a nightmare. When they reached the secluded corner where Kate had her private garden, William finally stopped. He turned to face her, and she saw tears threatening to spill from his blue eyes. In all their years together, through all the pressures of royal life, the media scrutiny, and the weight of duty, she had rarely seen him cry. "It's my father," William said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The doctors found something during his routine checkup. It's serious, Kate. More serious than they're telling the public." Kate felt the world tilt around her. King Charles had always been a pillar of strength in their lives, despite his sometimes difficult relationship with William. Since ascending to the throne, he had worked tirelessly to modernize the monarchy while honoring its traditions. The thought of losing him, especially now when William was still finding his footing as heir apparent, was almost too much to bear. "How long?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. "They're not sure. Maybe months. Maybe a year if we're lucky." William's voice cracked, and he turned away, trying to compose himself. "The worst part is, we can't tell anyone. Not yet. The palace wants to keep it quiet until they figure out how to handle the transition." Kate reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers as she had done countless times before. But this time, it felt different. This time, she was trying to hold on to something that was slipping away from them both. "We'll get through this," she said, though her own voice betrayed her uncertainty. "Together. We always do." William looked at her then, really looked at her, as if he was trying to memorize every detail of her face. "I'm scared, Kate. I'm scared I'm not ready for this. I'm scared of what it will mean for our children, for our family. I'm scared of losing the life we've built." The admission hung between them like a confession. William, who had been groomed his entire life for this moment, who had carried the weight of future kingship with such grace and dignity, was scared. And in that vulnerability, Kate saw not just her husband, but the young man she had fallen in love with all those years ago at St. Andrews University. She thought back to those early days when they were just William and Kate, two university students navigating the complexities of young love. She remembered the way he used to look at her across the library, how he would surprise her with picnics by the river, how they would stay up all night talking about their dreams and fears. Back then, the crown had seemed like a distant reality, something that belonged to the future version of themselves. But the future had arrived sooner than they had expected, and with it came responsibilities and pressures they had never fully prepared for. The weight of the crown was no longer a distant concern. It was pressing down on them with each passing day. "Do you remember," Kate said softly, "what you told me on our wedding day? You said that no matter what challenges we faced, we would face them together. That our love was stronger than any duty, any obligation, any fear." William nodded, a small smile breaking through his anguish. "I remember." You looked so beautiful that day, walking down the aisle. For a moment, I forgot about everything else. The cameras, the crowds, the weight of what we were promising each other. All I could see was you. That's still true, Kate said, stepping closer to him. We're still the same people who fell in love in university. We're still the same couple who promised to support each other through everything. This is just another challenge, and we'll face it like we've faced everything else, together. They stood in the garden for a long time, holding each other as the sun began to set behind the palace walls. Neither of them spoke about the practical implications of what they had learned, about the constitutional crisis that might unfold, about the media frenzy that would inevitably follow. For now, it was enough to simply be together, to draw strength from each other's presence. But, even as they comforted each other, both of them knew that their lives had fundamentally changed. The clock was ticking, and every moment they had as a family, every normal day with their children, every private moment together, had become infinitely more precious. As they walked back toward the palace, Kate noticed the way the evening light caught the windows of their home, making them glow like jewels. Soon, this might not be their home anymore. Soon, they might be living in Buckingham Palace, surrounded by even more protocol and ceremony. Soon, William would be king, and she would be queen, and their children would be one step closer to the throne. The thought terrified her, not because she wasn't prepared for the role, but because she knew what it would cost them. They would lose the relative normalcy they had fought so hard to maintain for their children. They would lose the privacy that had allowed them to be husband and wife, father and mother, before they were Duke and Duchess. That night, after they had put the children to bed and read them their favorite stories, Kate and William sat together in their private sitting room. The room was filled with photographs from their life together, their wedding day, holidays with the children, informal moments that captured their genuine happiness. Looking at those images now felt bittersweet, as if they were looking at artifacts from a life that was already slipping into the past. I keep thinking about George, William said suddenly. He's only 10 years old. He should have more time to just be a child, to not worry about any of this. Kate nodded, understanding his concern. George was old enough to sense when something was wrong, but too young to understand the full implications of what was happening. Charlotte and Louis were still blissfully unaware, but George had started asking questions about why his father seemed so sad, why there were more serious conversations happening behind closed doors. We'll protect them as long as we can, Kate said. We'll make sure they know they're loved, no matter what changes. But how do we prepare them for a world where their grandfather is gone, where their father is king, where their entire lives will be scrutinized even more than they already are? It was a question that had no easy answer. They had both grown up knowing about duty and service, but their childhoods had been relatively normal compared to what awaited their own children. George would one day be king, Charlotte would be a senior working royal, and Louis would have to find his own path in the shadow of the crown. The same way your grandmother prepared you and Harry, Kate said. With love, with honesty appropriate to their ages, and with the knowledge that family comes first, always. William smiled at the mention of Queen Elizabeth II. His grandmother had been his anchor through so many difficult times, including the devastating loss of his mother. She had shown him how to balance duty with humanity, how to serve the people while maintaining his own sense of self. She would have known what to do, he said. She always did. And so will you, Kate replied firmly. You're more like her than you realize. You have her strength, her sense of duty, her love for this country and its people. And you have something she didn't always have, a partner who understands what this life means. They talked late into the night, sharing fears and hopes, memories and dreams. They talked about the practical aspects of what lay ahead, the constitutional procedures, the coronation planning that would need to begin, the way their roles would evolve. But, mostly, they talked about their love for each other and their determination to protect their family through whatever was coming. As the clock struck midnight, marking the beginning of another day in their transformed reality, Kate and William made a pact. They would face this challenge as they had faced every other, united, honest with each other, and committed to preserving the love and normalcy they could for their children. They would not let the crown define them or their relationship. They would not let duty overshadow their devotion to each other and their family. They would find a way to be king and queen while still being William and Kate, husband and wife, father and mother. But even as they made these promises to each other, both of them knew that the road ahead would test every aspect of their relationship, every belief they held about themselves and their family. The love that had sustained them through a decade of marriage was about to face its greatest challenge. The next morning would bring new responsibilities, new pressures, and new fears. But tonight, they were still just William and Kate, holding each other in the quiet of their home, drawing strength from a love that had already weathered so many storms. Outside their window, London slept, unaware that the future of the monarchy hung in the balance. Inside the palace walls, two people who had never asked for this burden prepared to carry the weight of a nation on their shoulders, supported by nothing more than their faith in each other and their commitment to something greater than themselves. The tearful farewell they both sensed was coming would test everything they believed about love, duty, and sacrifice. But, for now, in the sanctuary of their private moments, they could still believe that love would be enough to see them through whatever lay ahead. 3 weeks after that devastating phone call, the palace corridors buzzed with an undercurrent of tension that even the most junior staff members could sense. Kate found herself studying every face she encountered, wondering who knew the truth and who remained blissfully unaware of the seismic shift happening within the royal family. The weight of the secret felt like carrying a stone in her chest, growing heavier with each passing day. William had thrown himself into his duties with an intensity that both impressed and worried her. His calendar, already packed with engagements, had somehow expanded to include meetings that stretched late into the evening. He was spending hours with constitutional experts, private secretaries, and trusted advisors, preparing for a transition that everyone hoped would still be months away. But Kate could see the toll it was taking on him. The laugh lines around his eyes had deepened into worry lines, and she often found him staring into space during family meals, his mind clearly elsewhere. The children sensed the change in their parents, though each reacted differently. George had become unusually quiet, watching his father with the sharp perception that came with being the eldest child. He asked fewer questions, but observed more, his young mind clearly working to understand why the atmosphere in their home had shifted. Charlotte, ever the performer, seemed to be trying harder to make everyone laugh, as if her theatrical antics could restore the lightness that had disappeared from their daily life. Little Louis, still blissfully unaware at his tender age, continued to bring moments of pure joy with his innocent observations and endless energy. Kate established new routines to maintain some sense of normalcy. Every morning, she made sure to have breakfast with the children, helping with homework and listening to their plans for the day. These moments became sacred to her, islands of ordinary family life in an ocean of uncertainty. She treasured George's excitement about his upcoming football match, Charlotte's detailed descriptions of her art projects, and Louis's earnest questions about why birds could fly, but people couldn't. But even these precious moments were shadowed by the knowledge of what was coming. Kate found herself memorizing details she had never noticed before. The way George concentrated when he was reading, the sound of Charlotte's delighted giggle, the feel of Louis's small hand in hers as they walked through the gardens. She was creating a mental archive of their innocence, knowing that once the truth became public, their childhood would fundamentally change. The strain of maintaining public appearances while grappling with private anguish was exhausting. At a charity luncheon for children's mental health, Kate delivered a speech about the importance of emotional support during difficult times, her words carrying a weight that only she and William understood. She spoke about resilience, about the power of family bonds, about facing uncertainty with courage and grace. The audience applauded warmly, unaware that she was essentially giving herself a pep talk in front of 300 people. William's struggle was even more visible to those who knew him well. During a state dinner for visiting dignitaries, Kate watched him charm foreign ministers and trade officials with the practiced ease of someone born to diplomacy. But she noticed the slight tremor in his hand when he lifted his wine glass, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, the moments when his attention seemed to drift even as he nodded appropriately at diplomatic small talk. Late at night, when the children were asleep and the palace had settled into quiet, Kate and William would find each other in their private study. Sometimes they talked about practical matters, how to tell the children, when to inform the Commonwealth governments, what kind of coronation would be appropriate given the circumstances. But, more often, they simply sat together, drawing comfort from each other's presence in the face of an uncertain future. "I had a meeting with the Archbishop today," William said one evening, his voice heavy with fatigue. "We talked about the coronation service, about the constitutional requirements, about timing." He paused, running his hands through his hair in a gesture Kate recognized as his way of processing overwhelming information. It all feels so surreal. 6 months ago, I was thinking about whether George was ready for secondary school. Now I'm planning my own coronation. Kate moved closer to him on the sofa, taking his hand in both of hers. His fingers were cold despite the warmth of the room, and she could feel the tension in his muscles. What did he say about timing? That we need to be prepared for it to happen quickly. The constitutional experts believe that once father's condition becomes public knowledge, there will be pressure for him to abdicate rather than wait. William's voice broke slightly on the word abdicate, as if speaking it made the reality more concrete. The word hung between them like a heavy curtain. Abdication had always been a last resort in royal history, associated with crisis and controversy. The idea that Charles, who had waited his entire life to be king, might have to give up the crown so soon after receiving it was heartbreaking on multiple levels. How is he handling all of this? Kate asked gently. Throughout this crisis, she had worried not just about her own family, but about Charles himself. Despite the complicated relationship he sometimes had with William, she had grown to love her father-in-law deeply. His passion for environmental causes, his dedication to his charities, and his obvious love for his grandchildren had won her affection and respect. Better than I would be, honestly, William admitted. He's been making plans, ensuring his charities will be taken care of, preparing briefing documents about his pet projects for me to continue. He's being incredibly gracious about the whole thing, as if he's just transitioning out of any ordinary job rather than giving up his life's work. Kate felt tears prick her eyes. The dignity with which Charles was facing his illness and its implications was both inspiring and heartbreaking. She thought about the sacrifices he had made throughout his life, the decades of preparation for a role he might only hold for a few years. We should spend more time with him, she said suddenly. All of us, together. The children should have more memories with their grandfather before. She couldn't finish the sentence, but William understood. I've been thinking the same thing. Maybe we could arrange some informal visits, just family time, without any official obligations. His voice took on a wistful quality. Do you remember that weekend last summer when we all went to Balmoral? The children were teaching him how to skip stones by the river, and Charlotte insisted on braiding flowers into his hair. Kate smiled at the memory. Charles had looked ridiculous with daisies woven through his thinning hair, but he had worn Charlotte's creation with such pride that it brought tears to her eyes even now. He was such a good sport about it. And the way he listened to George's endless questions about the castle's history, you could tell how much he loved sharing those stories. We need more of those moments, William said decisively. Not just for the children, but for all of us. Once this becomes public, once the constitutional machinery starts moving, there won't be time for simple family moments. Over the following weeks, they began orchestrating more casual family gatherings. Weekend trips to Windsor, informal dinners at Clarence House, walks in the private grounds where the children could run free while the adults talked quietly. These occasions became precious to all of them, though Kate could see the underlying sadness in Charles's eyes even as he played enthusiastically with his grandchildren. During one of these visits, Kate found herself alone with Charles in his private garden while William supervised the children's impromptu cricket match on the lawn. The spring flowers were in full bloom, a riot of color that seemed almost defiant in its beauty. Charles was deadheading roses with the careful attention he brought to everything he cared about. I want to thank you, he said suddenly, not looking up from the flowers. For what? Kate asked, genuinely puzzled. For making my son so happy. For giving him a family that grounds him. For being the kind of woman who will make an excellent queen. His voice was matter-of-fact, but Kate could hear the emotion underneath. Kate felt overwhelmed by his words. I'm terrified, she admitted. I'm terrified of letting you down, of letting the country down, of not being what William needs me to be. Charles looked at her then, his eyes kind but serious. Do you know what makes a good monarch? It's not knowing all the answers or never making mistakes. It's caring deeply about the people you serve and always trying to do what's right, even when it's difficult. You already have those qualities, Catherine. The rest can be learned. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Kate watched William with the children, saw how naturally he had slipped into the role of instructor and referee, patient with Louis's wild swings, and encouraging of Charlotte's theatrical celebrations when she made contact with the ball. He would make a good king, she realized. The doubt and fear he felt were actually signs of his fitness for the role. Only someone who truly understood the weight of responsibility would approach it with such seriousness. I have a favor to ask, Charles said, bringing her attention back to him. When the time comes, when this all becomes public, I want you to know that stepping back will be a relief in many ways. But I need to know that the things I care about most won't be forgotten. Kate nodded, understanding that this was more than a casual request. Tell me what matters most to you. The environmental work, obviously, but also the smaller things, the traditional crafts programs, the rural community initiatives, the projects that might not make headlines but make real differences in people's lives. His voice grew passionate as he spoke, the same intensity she had seen when he talked about climate change or sustainable farming. William will have his own priorities, and he should. But if even a few of these programs could continue, they will, Kate promised. We'll make sure of it. That evening, as they drove back to Kensington Palace through the London streets, Kate shared the conversation with William. She could see his relief that his father was thinking practically about the transition, but also his sadness at the reminder of what was being lost. I've been thinking about the coronation, William said as they stopped at a traffic light. If it happens soon, I want it to be different. Less elaborate, more focused on service than ceremony. Something that reflects who we are and what we want this monarchy to become. Kate squeezed his hand. That sounds perfect. Your grandmother's coronation was magnificent for its time, but this is a different era. People want authenticity more than pageantry. Exactly. I want our children to see that being royal isn't about crowns and carriages. It's about dedication and service. I want them to be proud of what we're doing, not overwhelmed by the trappings. As they pulled through the gates of Kensington Palace, Kate felt a surge of love for this man who was grappling with impossible circumstances while never losing sight of what really mattered. He could have wallowed in self-pity or been resentful of the timing, but instead he was thinking about how to honor his family's legacy while making the monarchy relevant for the future. That night, after the children were settled and they had reviewed their schedules for the following day, Kate and William sat together in their bedroom, finally allowing themselves to be vulnerable in the safety of complete privacy. Sometimes I look at you and the children, and I think about how much our lives are about to change, and I feel like I can't breathe, William admitted. Not because I don't want the responsibility, but because I'm afraid of what we might lose in the process. Kate understood completely. They had fought so hard to maintain some normalcy for their family, to give their children as regular a childhood as possible. The thought of losing that, of having every aspect of their lives become even more public and scrutinized, was terrifying. We won't lose what matters most, she said firmly. We won't lose each other. We won't lose our love for our children or our commitment to each other. Everything else is just details. But even as she spoke the words, Kate wondered if she was being naive. The crown had a way of consuming everything in its path, and history was littered with royal marriages that had crumbled under the weight of duty and expectation. She was determined that wouldn't happen to them, but she also knew that determination alone might not be enough. The inevitable moment arrived on a gray October morning when Kate was helping Charlotte practice her piano scales in the music room at Kensington Palace. The melody of a simple Bach piece filled the air when William appeared in the doorway, his face pale and drawn. Kate knew immediately that the call they had been dreading had finally come. "Daddy, listen to how well I can play this part," Charlotte exclaimed, not noticing her father's expression as she launched into her favorite section of the piece. William managed a smile and applauded appropriately, but Kate could see the effort it took for him to focus on their daughter's performance. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," he said, his voice only slightly strained. "Why don't you practice the rest while Mummy and I have a quick chat?" Charlotte, pleased with the praise, turned back to the piano with renewed enthusiasm. Kate followed William into the hallway, her heart pounding as she closed the door behind them. They walked in silence to his study, the familiar route feeling longer than usual. "How long do we have?" Kate asked as soon as the study door closed behind them. 2 weeks, maybe 3, William replied, sinking into his desk chair as if the weight of the news had physically exhausted him. "The doctors want to start more aggressive treatment, but Father has decided that it's time to step aside. He wants to make the announcement himself, before speculation starts spreading." Kate felt the room spinning slightly around her. They had known this moment was coming, had spent months preparing for it, but the reality still felt like a physical blow. In 2 weeks, their lives as they knew them would be over. William would be king, she would be queen, and their children would be thrust into an entirely new level of public scrutiny. "What about the children?" she asked, moving to stand behind his chair and placing her hands on his shoulders. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the way his body was coiled like a spring ready to snap. We tell them this weekend. Father wants to be the one to explain about his illness, and then we'll help them understand what it means for our family. William leaned back against her touch, drawing strength from her presence. I keep thinking about how young they are. George is only 10. This wasn't supposed to happen for years yet. Kate thought about their children, probably playing somewhere in the palace at this very moment, blissfully unaware that their world was about to change forever. George with his serious eyes and careful questions, Charlotte with her dramatic flair and boundless energy, little Louis with his infectious giggle and complete trust that his parents would always keep him safe. They're stronger than we think, she said, though she was trying to convince herself as much as William. And they have us. They have each other. They'll get through this because we'll help them get through it. William turned in his chair to face her, reaching up to take her hands in his. I need you to know something. These past few months, watching you hold our family together while I've been falling apart, seeing you continue to be everything our children need while dealing with your own fears, you've been incredible. I couldn't do any of this without you. Kate felt tears threatening and blinked them back. We're a team, she said simply. We always have been. That's not going to change just because we have different titles. But, even as she said the words, Kate wondered if she was being naive. The monarchy had a way of transforming people, of turning private individuals into public symbols. She had seen it happen to William's father, watched as Charles struggled to balance his personal convictions with the demands of his role. She had watched William himself change over the years as his duties increased and his privacy decreased. Would they still be able to be husband and wife when they were king and queen? Would they still be able to be parents first when the nation needed them to be sovereigns? These questions haunted her, but she pushed them aside. They would find a way. They had to. The announcement was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. Charles would address the nation from Windsor Castle, explaining his diagnosis and his decision to abdicate in favor of his son. The palace had spent days crafting the speech, balancing transparency with discretion, honesty with hope. William had been included in every draft, every revision, every decision about tone and content. The weekend before the announcement, the family gathered at Balmoral for what everyone understood might be their last private time together for the foreseeable future. The Scottish castle had always been a refuge for the royal family, a place where they could be more relaxed and informal. But, even there, the weight of impending change hung over everything they did. Saturday morning found Kate walking through the heather-covered hills with William and the children. George and Charlotte ran ahead, collecting interesting stones and pointing out birds, while Louis held tightly to his father's hand, occasionally stopping to examine a particularly fascinating flower or bug. It was the kind of simple family outing they had treasured throughout their marriage. But Kate found herself viewing everything through the lens of memory, knowing that moments like this would become increasingly rare. Daddy, George said suddenly, turning back to where his parents were walking, why has everyone been so serious lately? Even Grandpapa seems sad. Kate and William exchanged glances. They had planned to wait until that evening to have the family conversation, but George's direct question demanded an honest response. Let's sit down for a minute, William said, gesturing to a fallen log that provided a natural bench overlooking the valley below. The children gathered around them, sensing that something important was about to be discussed. William took a deep breath, looking at each of his children in turn. You know how sometimes people get sick, and doctors have to help them get better? All three children nodded, though Louis looked more confused than understanding. Well, Grandpapa has been feeling unwell, and the doctors have told him that he needs to rest more and not work so hard. William's voice was steady, but Kate could hear the effort it took to keep his emotions in check. Because being king is such a big job, he's decided that it would be better for someone else to do it so he can focus on feeling better. Charlotte's hand shot up as if she were in school. Who will be the new king? I will, sweetheart. That's how it works in our family. When the king can't do the job anymore, his oldest son takes over. Kate watched as understanding dawned on George's face. He was old enough to grasp the implications of what his father was saying, and she could see him working through what it would mean for their family. So you'll be the king? George asked quietly. Like Grandmama was the queen? Yes, exactly like that. And Mummy will be the queen, and all of you will be princes and princess of the king instead of the heir. Will we have to move? Charlotte asked, practical as always. Eventually, yes. We'll probably live at Buckingham Palace most of the time. William paused, letting this information sink in. I know this is a lot to understand, and It means our lives will change in some ways. But the most important things won't change. We'll still be a family. We'll still love each other. We'll still have time to play and laugh and be together. Lewis, who had been listening with the serious expression he wore when trying to understand grown-up conversations, suddenly brightened. Will I get to wear a crown? The question broke the tension, and everyone laughed. Maybe sometimes, Kate said, pulling him onto her lap. But most of the time, you'll just be our Lewis. They spent the rest of the morning answering questions, some practical and some wonderfully innocent. Charlotte wanted to know if she would have to curtsy to her father now. George asked if he would still be able to play football. Lewis was primarily concerned with whether they would still have time for bedtime stories. That afternoon, while the children played with their cousins who had joined them for the weekend, Kate and William took Charles for a walk around the estate. The autumn air was crisp, and the trees were beginning to turn brilliant shades of gold and red. It should have been a perfect day, but the weight of Tuesday's announcement colored everything. I want you to know, Charles said as they paused by the river where he had taught William to fish decades earlier, that I'm proud of the man you've become. I'm proud of the father you are, and I know you'll be an exceptional king. William's composure finally cracked, and Kate watched as father and son embraced beside the water where so many royal generations had found peace. It was a moment of pure emotion, unfiltered by protocol or public expectations, and Kate felt privileged to witness it. I'm not ready, William whispered, and Kate heard the scared young man beneath the confident exterior he usually presented to the world. No one ever is, Charles replied. My grandmother wasn't ready when her father died. I wasn't ready when my mother passed. But you'll grow into it, just as we all did. And you have advantages I never had. You have Catherine, and you have a clear sense of what kind of king you want to be. That evening, the extended family gathered for what everyone understood was a farewell dinner of sorts. Not a farewell to life, but a farewell to the informal relationships they had all enjoyed. Once William became king, every interaction would be filtered through protocol and precedent. Casual family dinners would become rare occasions requiring careful coordination. Kate watched as Charles interacted with each of his grandchildren, creating memories that would have to sustain them through whatever came next. He helped Lewis build an elaborate castle with his blocks, listened patiently to Charlotte's dramatic retelling of a story from school, and engaged George in a serious discussion about history and duty. Grandpapa, George said during a quiet moment, are you scared about being sick? Charles considered the question carefully before answering. A little bit, yes. But I'm not scared about your father taking over. He's going to be a wonderful king, and you're going to be very proud of him. Will you still be our grandpapa when Daddy's the king? Always, Charles promised, and Kate saw tears in his eyes. No matter what titles change, no matter what responsibilities shift, I will always be your grandpapa first. Monday evening, the night before the announcement, Kate found herself standing in their bedroom at Balmoral, looking out at the Scottish landscape that had provided such comfort to royal families for generations. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, she would wake up as a duchess and go to sleep as a queen consort. William joined her at the window, slipping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Any regrets? He asked softly. Kate thought about the question seriously. Did she regret falling in love with a future king? Did she regret the loss of privacy, the constant scrutiny, the way their children would never have truly normal lives? Did she regret the path that had brought them to this moment? No, she said finally, and realized she meant it. Not about us. Not about our family. Not about saying yes when you asked me to marry you. This isn't what we planned, and it's happening sooner than we hoped. But I can't regret the love that brought us here, even knowing what we're about to face. Kate turned in his arms to look at him directly, especially knowing what we're about to face. Because I know we'll face it together, and I know that whatever challenges come, we'll get through them because we have something real and strong and unbreakable. They made love that night with a desperate tenderness, as if they were trying to hold onto the last moments of their private life. It was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time, a goodbye to the couple they had been and a promise to the king and queen they were about to become. The next morning, Kate woke with the knowledge that she was experiencing her final day as Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge. By evening, she would be Catherine, Queen of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms. The transformation felt both monumental and strangely insignificant. She was still the same woman who loved her husband and children, who worried about their happiness and their future. But as she dressed carefully for the day ahead, choosing clothes that would be photographed and analyzed by millions of people, Kate knew that everything was different now. The private woman and the public figure had merged completely, and there would be no separation between who she was and what she represented. The last normal day of their old life was about to end, and their new existence as sovereigns was about to begin. The red light on the television camera blinked steadily as Charles sat behind the ornate desk in his private study at Windsor Castle. Kate and William watched from a small monitor in an adjacent room, their hands clasped tightly together as they prepared to witness the moment that would change their lives forever. The children were back at Kensington Palace with their nanny, shielded from the immediate intensity of this historic announcement. Charles looked directly into the camera with the dignity and composure that had defined his long life of public service. His voice was steady, though Kate could see the emotion in his eyes as he began to speak to the nation and the Commonwealth. "My fellow citizens of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms," he began, "I speak to you today with a heavy heart, but with complete confidence in the future of our constitutional monarchy." Kate felt William's grip on her hand tighten as his father continued, explaining his diagnosis with characteristic candor while maintaining the privacy appropriate to such a personal matter. Charles spoke of his love for his role as sovereign, his pride in serving the British people, and his gratitude for the support he had received during his reign. However, Charles continued, his voice growing slightly heavier, "Recent medical advice has made it clear that I cannot continue to serve you with the energy and dedication that this ancient office demands. Therefore, after careful consideration and consultation with my family and constitutional advisors, I have decided to abdicate the throne in favor of my son, William." The formal words hung in the air, transforming William from heir to king in that single sentence. Kate felt the weight of centuries pressing down on them both, the enormous responsibility that was now settling on their shoulders like an invisible crown. Charles's eyes seemed to look directly at them through the camera as he spoke about William's qualifications, his dedication to service, and his deep love for the country he would now lead. "I have watched my son grow into a man of exceptional character, intelligence, and compassion. He has served his country with distinction in the military, and as a working member of our royal family. I have complete confidence that he will be an outstanding king." He spoke of Kate with equal warmth and respect, acknowledging her dedication to her charitable work and her role as a loving mother and wife. "Catherine has already proven herself to be a remarkable member of our royal family, and I know she will bring grace, intelligence, and genuine care for others to her new role as queen." As the announcement continued, Kate found herself thinking about the thousands of people who would be watching this broadcast, learning simultaneously that their king was stepping down and that a new reign was beginning. She thought about the constitutional machinery that was already beginning to turn, the preparations that would need to be made, the ceremonies that would need to be planned. But, mostly, she thought about her children, safe for now in their playroom, unaware that their grandfather's words were reshaping their entire future. George would one day sit on the throne his father was about to inherit. Charlotte and Louis would spend their entire lives in the direct line of succession, their every move watched and analyzed by millions of people around the world. When Charles finished speaking and the camera's red light finally went dark, William stood slowly, as if the weight of his new responsibilities had made him physically heavier. Kate rose with him, and together they walked to the study where Charles was removing his microphone, his duty done. "Well," Charles said with a wry smile that didn't quite hide his exhaustion, "that's that then. Long live the king." He looked at William with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "I'm sorry it had to happen this way, son. You deserved more time." William embraced his father, both men holding each other tightly as the reality of what had just occurred settled around them. When they finally separated, William's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything. For preparing me as well as you could, for showing me what it means to serve, for giving me the example of how to be a good man and a good king." Kate watched this exchange between father and son, understanding that she was witnessing a moment that would be remembered by historians, but feeling it as a deeply personal family transition. The formal abdication would require parliamentary approval and constitutional procedures, but, in this room, the essential transfer of responsibility had already taken place. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, briefings, and preparations. Constitutional lawyers explained the abdication process. Private secretaries outlined the immediate changes to their schedules and security arrangements. Protocol officers began planning for the eventual coronation, though everyone agreed it should wait until Charles's health situation had stabilized. Through it all, Kate found herself marveling at how normal their private family life remained despite the seismic changes happening around them. The children still needed help with homework. They still squabbled over toys and required bedtime stories. Louis still insisted on wearing his favorite superhero costume to breakfast every morning, completely unconcerned that his father was now the King of England. It was during one of these ordinary family moments that the impact of their transformation became unexpectedly clear. Kate was reading with Charlotte in the palace library when her daughter looked up from her book with a puzzled expression. "Mummy," Charlotte said, "Sarah at school says I have to curtsy to you now because you're the queen. Is that true?" Kate felt her heart skip. In all their planning and preparation, they had focused on the big constitutional questions and somehow overlooked the small, intimate changes that would affect their daily lives. The thought of her own children curtsying to her was both absurd and heartbreaking. "What do you think?" Kate asked carefully, not wanting to give Charlotte an answer that might contradict what William thought about such protocols. Charlotte considered this seriously. "I think you're my mummy first, and the queen second. So maybe I curtsy to the queen part sometimes, but I hug the mummy part always." Kate felt tears spring to her eyes at her daughter's wisdom. "I think that's exactly right, sweetheart. You're very smart." That evening, Kate shared the conversation with William as they walked through the palace gardens, taking advantage of one of their last opportunities for relative privacy before the increased security measures took effect. The autumn air was crisp, and the early stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Charlotte's got it figured out better than most adults," William said with a rueful laugh. "I've been wondering the same thing about how this changes our family dynamics. Do the children call me Your Majesty now? Do you? Do we maintain separate bedrooms like my grandparents did?" Kate stopped walking and turned to face him. "Is that what you want?" "God, no," William said immediately. "I want us to be as normal as possible, especially in private. I want our children to see us as parents first, even if the rest of the world sees us as king and queen first. I want to still be able to hold your hand, to argue with you about whose turn it is to help with homework, to fall asleep next to you every night." "Then, that's what we'll do," Kate said firmly. "We'll figure out the public protocols, but, in private, we're still William and Kate. We're still mummy and daddy. We're still husband and wife." The formal parliamentary session to approve the abdication took place on a crisp Thursday morning in November. Kate and William sat in the gallery of the House of Commons, watching as elected representatives debated and ultimately approved the constitutional change that would make William king. The process was remarkably swift, taking less than 2 hours from start to finish. But the moment that truly marked their transformation came that afternoon, when they returned to Buckingham Palace for the first time as king and queen. Kate had visited the palace many times over the years, but walking through those doors as its primary resident felt entirely different. The staff who greeted them were the same people who had served the royal family for years, but the deference in their manner was notably heightened. "Your Majesty," the master of the household said, addressing William with the title that still sounded foreign and overwhelming. "We've prepared the state apartments for your review. We can begin the transition of your personal effects whenever you're ready." Kate felt a wave of loss as she realized they would be leaving Kensington Palace, the first home she and William had shared as a married couple, the place where all 3 of their children had taken their first steps and spoken their first words. Buckingham Palace was magnificent and historic, but it would never be home in the same way. That night, as they lay in the vast bedroom that had been prepared for them, Kate and William held each other with a desperate intensity. Tomorrow would bring the first full day of William's reign, with all the meetings and decisions and public appearances that would define their new reality. "I keep thinking about my grandmother," William said quietly. "She was 25 when she became queen, younger than we are now, and she managed to hold everything together for 70 years. If she could do it, we can do it." Kate thought about Queen Elizabeth II, the woman who had been such a constant presence in British life that it was hard to imagine the monarchy without her. She had managed to modernize the institution while maintaining its dignity, to be both a symbol and a real person, to serve the public while protecting her family's privacy. She had Prince Philip, Kate pointed out. She had someone who understood the pressures, someone who could support her when no one else could reach her. We have each other in the same way. Promise me something, William said, turning to face her in the darkness. Promise me that no matter how difficult this gets, no matter how much pressure we're under, we'll always be honest with each other. Promise me we won't let the crown come between us. I promise, Kate said without hesitation. And you promise me the same thing. Promise me you'll tell me when you're struggling, when you need help, when you're scared or overwhelmed or just tired of being king. I promise, William replied, sealing their mutual vow with a kiss that tasted of hope and determination and the kind of love that had already survived a decade of extraordinary pressures. The next morning, Kate woke up as Catherine, Queen of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms. The title felt strange and enormous, but as she watched William sleep peacefully beside her, she realized that the essential truth of their relationship remained unchanged. They were still the couple who had fallen in love at university, still the parents who worried about their children's happiness, still the partners who had chosen to face life's challenges together. Their first public appearance as king and queen was scheduled for later that morning, a brief walkabout to meet people who had gathered outside Buckingham Palace to show their support for the new reign. As Kate dressed carefully for this first public moment of their new life, she thought about all the people who would be watching, all the expectations they would need to meet, all the ways they would need to balance their personal selves with their public roles. But she also thought about the conversation she had overheard that morning between George and Charlotte as they got ready for school. George had been nervous about the attention he might receive from classmates now that his father was king. Charlotte, with characteristic confidence, had told him that nothing important had changed. They were still the same family, just with fancier titles. Kate smiled as she put on her coat and gloves, remembering that wisdom often came from unexpected sources. Their 8-year-old daughter had understood something that many adults struggled with, that titles and roles were external things, but love and family and the bonds that truly mattered transcended any constitutional position. As she and William prepared to step out onto the palace balcony to greet the crowd for the first time as sovereigns, Kate felt a deep sense of peace beneath the natural nervousness. They would make mistakes. They would face criticism and challenges and moments when the pressure felt overwhelming. But they would face all of it together, supported by a love that had already proven strong enough to weather any storm. 6 months into their reign, Kate stood in the private sitting room of Buckingham Palace, watching the London skyline through windows that had witnessed centuries of British history. The spring morning was bright with promise, but her heart felt heavy with the weight of recent developments. Charles's health had taken a dramatic turn for the worse, and the doctors had gently but firmly informed the family that their time together was becoming precious and limited. The transition to their new roles had been smoother than anyone had dared hope. William had stepped into his responsibilities as king with a confidence that surprised even those who knew him best, while Kate had found her footing as queen consort with a grace that had earned widespread public affection. The children had adapted remarkably well to their new circumstances, though the increased security and media attention had required significant adjustments to their daily routines. But beneath the public success of the new reign lay the private heartache of watching Charles grow weaker with each passing week. The treatments had bought them time together as a family, but they couldn't halt the inexorable progress of his illness. Kate had watched William struggle with the dual burden of learning to be king while simultaneously preparing to say goodbye to his father. "Your Majesty," came a gentle voice from behind her. Kate turned to see Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, standing respectfully in the doorway. Even after months of the title, Kate still felt a small jolt when people addressed her as queen. "His Majesty has requested that you join him in the study when you have a moment." "Of course, thank you," Kate replied, smoothing her dress and preparing to face whatever news William needed to share. These private summons had become more frequent as Charles's condition worsened, and she had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated whether the news would be medical updates, constitutional matters, or simply her husband needing emotional support. She found William standing behind his desk, but he wasn't working on the papers spread before him. Instead, he was staring at a photograph of his father taken just a few months earlier at Charlotte's school play. Charles had insisted on attending despite his doctor's concerns, and the image captured him laughing delightedly at something Charlotte had whispered to him during the intermission. His face showed the effects of his illness, but his joy in that moment with his granddaughter was unmistakable. "The doctors want to move him to the hospice facility at Windsor," William said without looking up from the photograph. "They think it would be more comfortable for him, and more private for us as a family. Kate felt her heart constrict. The hospice facility was beautiful and provided excellent care, but the suggestion to move there carried implications that neither of them wanted to acknowledge directly. It meant that Charles's doctors believed they were entering the final phase of his illness. What does he want? Kate asked, moving to stand beside her husband and placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. He wants to stay at Clarence's house as long as possible, but he's also being practical about what's best for everyone. William's voice was carefully controlled, but Kate could hear the emotion underneath. He doesn't want the children to remember him as being constantly surrounded by medical equipment. He wants their last memories to be of him as himself, not as a patient. Kate understood. Charles had always been thoughtful about how his actions affected others, and even facing his own mortality, he was thinking primarily about his family's well-being. The decision about where he would spend his final weeks was really a decision about how they would all remember this time. What do you think we should do? She asked gently. William finally looked at her, and Kate saw the scared son beneath the confident king. I think we should follow his lead. He's been making good decisions his whole life, and he deserves to make this one too. He paused, struggling with his next words. I just don't know how to tell the children. This had been haunting both of them for weeks. George, at 10, was old enough to understand that his grandfather was seriously ill, but the concept of death remained largely abstract to him. Charlotte, at 8, had noticed that Grandpapa seemed tired more often and needed more help with things, but she still expected him to recover fully. Louis, at 5, simply accepted that Grandpapa needed extra rest and thought nothing of the medical equipment that had become part of Charles's daily life. Maybe we don't tell them everything at once, Kate suggested. Maybe we just focus on spending as much time as possible with him, and we help them understand gradually what's happening. William nodded, relief evident in his face. Kate had become his anchor during this impossible time, helping him balance his grief as a son with his responsibilities as a king. The constitutional requirements of his role meant that even in the midst of personal crisis, there were meetings to attend, documents to review, and public appearances to maintain. That afternoon, they gathered the children for what had become their weekly visit to Clarence's house. These family occasions had taken on increased importance as Charles's energy waned, and Kate made sure they were as normal and joyful as possible. Charles always seemed to rally for these visits, drawing energy from his grandchildren's presence that surprised his medical team. They found Charles in his favorite sitting room, surrounded by photo albums and memory books he had been organizing. Kate realized he was creating a visual history for his grandchildren, ensuring they would have tangible reminders of their relationship when he was no longer there to create new memories with them. Grandpapa, Louis exclaimed, running to climb into Charles's lap with the unconscious trust of a child who had never known a world without this loving grandfather. Mummy said we could help you with your pictures. Charles's face lit up with genuine pleasure. Despite his physical weakness, his love for his grandchildren remained as strong as ever. Kate watched as he carefully showed them photographs from his own childhood, stories from his youth, pictures of their grandmother Diana that he had saved for them. This is from when your father was just about George's age, Charles said, pointing to a photograph of a young William on a bicycle at Balmoral. He was so determined to ride without training wheels that he practiced for hours every day until he mastered it. George studied the photograph with intense interest. Did he crash a lot? Oh yes, Charles laughed, the sound weaker than it used to be but still full of warmth. He came in with scraped knees more days than not. But he never gave up. That's something wonderful about your father. He doesn't give up on things that matter to him. Kate felt tears threatening as she watched this exchange. Charles was doing more than sharing memories. He was teaching his grandchildren about their father's character, helping them understand the qualities that would make William a good king and a good man. Even facing his own mortality, he was thinking about their future and the lessons they would need. Charlotte, ever the performer, had found a photograph of Charles in theatrical costume from his university days. Grandpapa, you look so silly in this one. Were you in a play? I was indeed, Charles said, studying the image with amusement. I played a rather dramatic prince in a Shakespeare play. I thought I was quite good, but, looking back, I suspect I was rather over the top. Like me, Charlotte exclaimed with delight, and everyone laughed. Charlotte's dramatic tendencies had been a source of family amusement for years, and Kate loved seeing this connection between grandfather and granddaughter. As the afternoon wore on, Kate noticed that Charles was becoming tired, though he was trying hard not to show it. She caught William's eye and nodded toward the door, and Together they began the gentle process of concluding the visit. But, before they left, Charles asked to speak with each child individually. Kate watched from the doorway as he had quiet conversations with each of his grandchildren. Conversations she knew were meant to be final words of wisdom and love. With George, he spoke seriously about responsibility and kindness. Kate could hear him explaining that being the future king meant always thinking about how to help other people, about using privilege to serve rather than to benefit oneself. George listened with the solemnity he brought to all important conversations, occasionally nodding to show he understood. With Charlotte, the conversation was lighter but no less meaningful. Charles talked about her creativity and her kindness to others, encouraging her to always use her gifts to bring joy to the world. He reminded her that being a princess meant being a role model for other children, but that she should never let duty overwhelm her natural spirit and enthusiasm. With Louis, the conversation was simplest but perhaps most heartbreaking. Charles held his youngest grandson and told him about how much joy he had brought to everyone who loved him. He made Louis promise to always be kind to others and to remember that Grandpapa would love him forever, no matter what. When they finally left Clarence's house that evening, all three children were unusually quiet. Kate could see them processing the weight of their grandfather's attention, the sense that something important was happening even if they couldn't fully understand what it was. That night, after the children were asleep, Kate and William sat together in their private apartment at Buckingham Palace, both emotionally drained from the afternoon's visit. They had established a routine of debriefing these family occasions, helping each other process the complex emotions of watching Charles decline while trying to maintain normalcy for the children. "He's saying goodbye," William said quietly. "Those conversations with the children, he's making sure he's said everything he needs to say." Kate nodded, having reached the same conclusion. "How much time do you think we have?" "Days, maybe a week or two." William's voice was barely audible. "The doctors aren't saying it directly, but I can read between the lines. And I can see it in his eyes. He's ready." Kate felt her own tears finally beginning to fall. Charles had become like a father to her, supporting her through the challenges of royal life, encouraging her charitable work, and showing unwavering love for her children. The thought of losing him felt like losing a piece of her own family. "I keep thinking about the children," she said through her tears. "George is going to be devastated. He adores his grandfather, and he's old enough to understand what death means. Charlotte will be confused and angry. And Louis." She couldn't finish the thought. William pulled her closer, both of them drawing comfort from each other's presence. "We'll help them through it," he said, "just like my grandmother helped me and Harry when our mother died. We'll answer their questions honestly, we'll let them grieve, and we'll make sure they know how much their grandfather loved them." The call came 3 days later, just after dawn on a Thursday morning. Kate woke to find William already sitting up in bed, his phone pressed to his ear and his face grave. She knew without asking what news he was receiving. Charles had passed peacefully in his sleep at Clarence's house, surrounded by the photographs and memories he had been organizing for his grandchildren. His nurses reported that his final words had been about his love for his family and his confidence in William's abilities as king. As William made the necessary phone calls to inform government officials and begin the constitutional procedures that followed the death of a former monarch, Kate found herself thinking about the children sleeping peacefully down the hall. In a few hours, they would wake up to a world without their beloved grandfather, and she and William would have to help them navigate that loss while managing their own grief. The next few days blurred together in a haze of funeral preparations, public condolences, and private mourning. The nation grieved for a king who had served briefly but with distinction, while the family grieved for a beloved father and grandfather. Kate marveled at William's strength during this time, the way he managed to be both a grieving son and a supportive king to his people. The funeral service was held at Westminster Abbey, a ceremony that balanced royal tradition with personal touches that reflected Charles's character and interests. Kate sat with the children, helping them understand the rituals and significance of saying goodbye to their grandfather in such a public way. As they left the Abbey after the service, Kate felt the weight of all they had lost and gained in the past year. They had lost a beloved family member, but they had also discovered strengths they didn't know they possessed. They had lost their privacy and their old life, but they had gained the opportunity to serve in ways they had never imagined. Most importantly, they had learned that love could survive any transformation, any pressure, any loss. The love between her and William had not only endured their elevation to the throne, it had grown stronger under the pressure. The love they shared with their children had deepened as they navigated these challenges together. And the love they had shared with Charles would continue to guide them long after he was gone. Standing on the steps of Westminster Abbey, surrounded by world leaders and ordinary citizens who had come to pay their respects, Kate realized that they had finally, truly begun their reign not just as king and queen, but as the leaders their family and their country needed them to be. The tearful farewell that had moved the nation was not just an ending, but a beginning, the start of a new chapter in their love story, and in the story of the modern monarchy.